Elevator Systems, Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, where we look at ideas and concepts from Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief and understandable ways. Our topic for today is divorce. And I'm very pleased that Dr. Carrie Collier is joining us again for another episode. Welcome, Carrie.
Yeah.
Carrie is a researcher, lecturer, and family therapist specializing in Bowen theory. She has a PhD in counselor education and over 25 years of study and practice as a licensed professional counselor. She is on the faculty and the board of the Bowen Center in Washington and also served as director there for 2 years. She's developed a family unit functioning questionnaire used to gather information about families and recently published research on the language of nature in Murray Bowen's archival papers. And I'll link to both of those below. Also link to the Murray Bowen Archives Project, who we're working with this season. So that's very cool. Carrie joins us today from Northern Virginia, where she lives with her husband and her son. Mm-hmm. Thanks for joining. You get the first pitch. I was saying we could do a PhD dissertation each on this topic, but 25 words.
Yeah. I mean, I think, with everything in Bowen theory, the idea is that what typically is the symptom that people focus on, I think Bowen theory and Dr. Bowen would try to focus people back to what happened before the symptom, So it's so easy for people to get stuck in divorce and get stuck in the legal part of it, the monetary part, which is a challenge and which is really difficult for people. But I think where Bowen theory would come in, and maybe even a Bowen systems coach would come into not only looking at those challenges, but also trying to get the people involved thinking about what their part in it is. And then all the impacting triangles, that surround it. What was going on before the divorce? If there were more symptoms in the marriage, which often there are, what was going on before those symptoms, or when would the symptoms pop up and how that would go? So I think I think about it from sort of a coaching way, and how if you were to work with a coach, what it would look like. And I think I was just looking in Bowen's textbook, and one other thing that I think a Bowen systems coach would pay attention to when someone is coming to them about a divorce, or, I think in most marriages, people consider it, so just go there with your coach, talk about it. What is the impact of this? What would it really mean? And so I think as a coach, being open to that. But I just read in Bowen's book, he said, the denied emotional attachments to the past replicates itself with one's spouse and one's children. And so he's basically saying, the more that one denies his or her attachment to the past, the less choice that one has in determining the pattern with his own wife or children, is what he said on page 433. So I think Bowen's always going back to the past. What is the history? What was your function in your family? What does this mean? And so I think I go there. When I work with people, we talk about the past, and that will potentially set you up for maybe a better future. So I have a lot more to say, but that would be my initial thoughts.
Thanks,
Great,
Carrie.
Katie.
I think I'm going to pick up on a lot of themes. I was thinking as I was preparing for this today to think about how useful Bowen theory is to keep one's neutrality about divorce. It's a hard topic for some people to be neutral about. So I, like Carrie mentioned, was thinking through divorce through the lens of theory as the way that the system at that time adapted to the tension in it. This was the symptom that came out of that unit when they were trying to manage the tension or anxiety in the system. But I, like Carrie, I think also think about the complexity that's layered in. I always think when I'm sitting with a family to ask reasons about the marriage, the multi-generational process as well, but the marriage, what was the context? What were the reasons that these two folks got married? I think that's important to think through. How isolated was this marital unit from other people in the larger system? What was the multi-generational process for managing self in relationship? And then the thing I was thinking about that I imagine we'll talk about more today is, from a clinician's perspective, I really get interested in sitting with couples who are thinking about divorce or have decided to divorce. Is what is the process that they're coming to therapy to think about and learn about themselves? So I think, I think that helps orient the work. Is what is the goal for self as you're thinking about thinking about this divorce that you're contemplating. I like that idea of don't be afraid to kind of go there that Carrie mentioned. What is it you're thinking about? What are you interested in learn? When do you notice when you slip out of thinking about self and get really focused on the other? I think that's a lot of the work around sitting with people in divorce. And then I think a part of this is really, how do you understand the emotional process in the family? So I think I'm looking at this a lot through the mechanisms that are available to think about the family emotional process. So there's my muddled pitch. Dixie, what have you got?
Yeah, I focused, it feels simple, but about triangles. And I was thinking about the triangles that are created in a divorce, and then the patterns and positions in pre-existing triangles that get perhaps intensified through divorce. So new triangles could be, lawyer, judges, mediators, counselors, or an affair partner, that kind of thing. These people that come in, and then how old triangles may shift or intensify with kids or friends or family members, perhaps taking sides, choosing someone to blame, intensifying maybe around things like time, like custody battles or money. The dad or whoever keeps buying all the favorite things, and how that can show up. And I guess thinking about the challenge it can be to sort of maybe take the high road or manage yourself maturely in those triangles, and that there can be short-term, maybe negative consequences, but how does a person be more mature in some of these triangles? So that was mine. And then from the Murray Bowen Archives Project, we have a quote from Dr. Bowen in 1962. My effort has been to understand the marital disharmony as a human phenomenon in which both people have played a part, rather than a situation in which either one is primarily responsible. And another quote from Dr. Bowen: the one who runs away can have an intense relationship in a marriage which he sees as ideal and permanent at the time, but the physical distance pattern is part of him. When tensions mount in the marriage, he will use the same pattern of running away, which I think speaks to some of the things you guys have touched on. And then finally, one from Roberta Gilbert in Extraordinary Relationships. Just a really kind of succinct paragraph. She says, theory provides guidelines for managing or moving through divorce. Keeping one's own anxiety processed will aid clear thinking, which is essential in crisis, being aware of the triangles and engaging them as they appear in the family, the legal profession, the courts, etc. Dilemmas can be addressed by anchoring oneself in facts, logic, and the bigger picture. Watching for emotional process can help to keep one more out of it, on course and able to think. And once the relationship is reestablished after the usual cutoff represented by divorce, working towards separate boundaries, openness, and an equal stance becomes as important here as in other relationships. So there we go. What do you all notice in all of those ideas?
I too, I think the connecting from your mature side. So I think Bowen theory is about, the immature selves fusing with the other immature self in the marriage. And so what does that look like? And then what does that look like in divorce? And how does each person pull up, function up and speak to the mature side of the other? That's very hard to do when there's stress and the anxiety is high. And then you have all the triangles. And so I think, really, if you can find a thought partner or someone, a coach who can help you think through the process. And as Dr. Gilbert was mentioning, staying thoughtful and being in that clear thinking. I think a lot of times people just have to be still for a while before they get to that part, before they can really think clearly, because it's so difficult in all these triangles. So, I think another part is what how the other family members play into the divorce, that you spoke to as well, Dixie, about not only just the neutrality about the term divorce, but then also how do people stay neutral about this marriage that is now, dissolving. So,
yeah. And how do you manage yourself in the face of maybe their lack of neutrality? I think, I think the act of divorce within a family system is such a workout for many involved to figure out what they want to do in it. And I think that was a theme I heard there. I was interested in the reference to cutoff. I think just the push back to understanding that multi-generational process. And I don't think it was said as cutoff, but running away. I was thinking about that as running away. So, watching if you run away from a family into a relationship, there is this predictability potentially to you running away from that relationship when the tension or the stress gets high, and just watching that and getting interested in that process. I was thinking about a premarital thing of getting interested in how did your potential partner launch from their household? How do you learn about that? How does that give you information about their functioning in relationship for your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people don't go back and think about how they got into this relationship to begin with. What were the dynamics of when you met your spouse? What was going on? What was going on in your family? How was your relationship with your parents? I think that's what Dr. Bowen was talking about, denying this attachment to your parents. What did that look like? And how did that immaturity that you brought to the table that then fused with someone else's immaturity, how did that create this marriage? And what did that look like?
Yeah.
And I don't think that divorce is all about, I don't think that just because someone gets divorced, they're more immature than the next person. I don't think that you can look at it that simply. I think some divorces are necessary. And I think sometimes that's what it takes for people to define a self.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. I think sometimes the choice to leave a relationship is one working on their maturity and really being thoughtful about that process.
I mean, there's the obvious ones, right? Where, that's the other thing. In a family, there can be sort of this taboo about divorce. And so maybe you'll see a family where there's just one divorce that crops up. And people are aware of that, oh, nobody gets divorced in the family, So how do people respond when there is a divorce? What do they do? I think that's one thing. But then I think there's this idea of, is divorce really a bad thing? It really can be a way for someone to find his or own freedom or to be a self. It also may not look like that. But I think divorce is not always a bad thing. And I think people can read into that and really take that on. And then you've got a whole nother set of issues.
Yeah. Having Bowen theory for me as a resource to think about the variability that can exist in any event in a family, right? Like in some families, this is a move for, defining a self and gaining more maturity. And in some, it's kind of where their most immature side might show up. So really being open to that, observing that variability and managing the preconceived thinking that might come from your own family of origin if you're the coach there.
Mm-hmm. I think some marriages get to a critical level, like if there's conflict and if the couple does not separate or get away from one another, there could be a death. That's sort of the extreme. And so it's pretty obvious that the divorce is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think it gets more complicated when it's more in the norm of just there's a criticalness, there are symptoms, the anxiety is high, the triangle of the marital partner, the intensity becomes too intense, and then the mechanisms kick in. And there are all sorts of things that can go on.
I had really hoped. I decided to rewatch Intolerable Cruelty with George Clooney and Catherine Zeta-Jones, and he's a famous divorce lawyer, and I'm like, I'm gonna get all these pearls of wisdom from this movie. I got none. It's mostly silliness. It's a very funny movie, but it really is about Catherine Zeta-Jones as this woman who sort of just marries for the money of the man with the intention of divorcing and then making her money. But the one quote that I thought maybe would be of any use to this episode, I didn't want it to all be for waste. But George Clooney is meeting. He's the lawyer for the husband. Catherine Zeta-Jones comes in with her lawyer, and as they're walking in, the husband looks quite nervous, and George Clooney says, "I'll do the talking." I wrote it down here. "I'll do the talking. I know you'll be tempted to chime in, but remember, you're in an emotionally vulnerable state. I'm the professional." And then as the scene goes, George Clooney just sort of has this emotional meltdown as the lawyer, as the professional. And so that's about as deep as my example gets this week. But I mean, there's lots of intensity. I mean, if you think about the function of a lawyer, and their livelihood is making money, which can be related to maybe extending some of these conflicts, or get very complicated.
I went and read a few things, a few different chapters. I think I've talked about a few times this season. I've looked into the Family Life Cycle book, and there's some thinking about divorce in there. There's a chapter in the clinical book where Ed Beal talks about child-focused divorce. And I'll put in some resources if people want to learn more. And also a nice chapter about thinking about connecting with in-laws. There's two different ones. And what it got me thinking about as an example is one of the things that I think happens during divorce in a system is a reorganization of relationships. And so I always find that thinking about triangles and thinking about tracing the family's history is useful as a lens to view these renegotiation or reorganization of relationships, and how challenging that can be, but also what an opportunity that is to work on. One of the things I think we talk about a lot on here is Bowen's idea of person-to-person relationships. I think one thing that I have always found stands up in my own family is these times of sort of major changes where, births, deaths, entrances, exits. I think a divorce can be a bit of an exit of something in some sorts. Have these opportunities to just work on self, not just the person getting divorced, but me, say my aunt gets divorced. I have a way to think about, how am I going to relate to her? How am I going to relate to her ex-husband? How am I going to relate to their children? And I think it just provides opportunities for people to think about this, as well as opportunities to jump into some pretty significant fusion with other people, maybe through gossip or through taking sides. So I just thought it was a useful thing to bring to this podcast, to think about that time as being an opportunity for both the couple, each member of the couple, but also the people in the larger system to think about how they want to manage themselves in that.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the impact on a relationship when the people around those two can stay in relationship to both people, and the difference that can make if your sibling is going through a divorce, and the difference that can make if you can connect with that spouse that married into the family. And I just think that trickles down, because then I could think about, okay, if you can connect with the spouse, then how much of a difference does that make with that spouse's offspring, your niece and nephew, right? I mean, all of the relationships are connected. And how much of a difference will that make with that spouse's job, or maybe the income, so then we're talking about income. So I just think there's just this web of triangles, and the impact of, if one person can just be a leader in the family and really have the open communication, which is a clear thinking of, I knew you for 15 years. I was at your baby shower. I was at your wedding, and I just want to relate to you. But that can be a really difficult thing to do for people. But I just think what a difference that can make. If someone can do that, it can really, maybe George Clooney wouldn't, so much pressure wouldn't be on George Clooney if there were a family leader that took some of that energy and anxiety and focus on that. Because I think families get stuck when they don't know what to do, right? Yeah. There's this divorce, and, this awful person had this affair, and now we can't like this person. But what is what does that mean for the kids? Or what does that mean for the in-laws? All these relationships that have been fostered and people that have been in your lives. And that's when you start to see the distance and the cutoff
Right.
and and then how much choice do people have in doing that? I think that's what Bowen theory is about. If you can study the history of the family, you might see certain families just have a better capacity to do that from their history, and others not. I mean, to some people it's obvious. Of course I'm going to invite, my son-in-law, who was my son-in-law for 20 years, some people that just comes really easily, and others it's not, others, they cut people out of the pictures or they don't talk about them anymore. And so I think divorce is just a time for one to watch all of the anxiety in a system.
Yeah.
And in the triangles. And that's really when you can see the family struggles,
I was thinking, Carrie, something you said when you were on one of our last podcasts is about when a story doesn't get told in a family, or when not maybe a secret, but like when information isn't open and shared, how that carries down in chronic anxiety. And when you were saying that, that's what I was thinking about, how I've sat with the children, maybe of grandparents' divorce or parents' divorce, who just think nothing was talked about. So we sort of have to make up our own idea of what this is, what happened, what was this about? We don't talk about that person. And so I think the opportunity available to the family to be more open and connected and continue to have relationship or conversation about that is really an opportunity to take. I don't know, I just think it makes a difference.
I can't tell you how many people that I have worked with in coaching, where they were talking to me about their family diagram, and I say, "Oh, they got a divorce. What was the reason?" "I don't know."
Yeah.
Nobody talks about it. Okay, well, that would be kind of interesting. Like,
yeah.
what was the family talk? And if there isn't family talk, what is that about? Is the family covering up for someone? Is it? I think Bowen would call that a peace agree family, where, okay, you're going to get a divorce. Okay, let's just move along. Everything's great. So then there's also the denial part of it, of this challenge that people are up against. And that can get in the way too. I mean, you have people who want to, cut people off and kill them off because they ruined the marriage. But then you also have families that want to just agree with it and not say anything.
Yep.
And then you move on. And then people are left to maybe not even gossip. Maybe there's just nothing's ever talked about. And then what do you do with that? How do you think about a marriage that ended in divorce, but you don't know what happened?
Yeah.
And what does that do for you and your own marriage and how you find a partner? It's just sort of gathering facts, but also the facts of functioning of how this family survived,
And I think that's when you have those things where, I sit with clients who think, I have this anxiety about this relationship, but I don't know where it's coming from. And that way, I think, is so useful to me to have theory, to look at that multi-generational process, to think maybe this isn't yours. This anxiety that you're thinking about in this relationship isn't yours. Maybe it is that multi-generational process that's showing up for you, that chronic anxiety.
And I've been thinking how it lives on in the kid's wedding in 15 years, or the Christmases, or those events when the family in theory is together, and how do people act with each other in those moments decades later.
I really like it when I can talk with someone about, oh, you're going to an event and you're going to see your now spouse's ex, right? So what is that going to be like for you? What does that entail? Have you ever met this person before? And I find that when people can just talk about that, they can just begin to think about it, begin to prepare the system, begin to prepare their brain for what this is going to be like. I think that things go better at that first meeting. Like I was working with a man and a woman once, and they had never thought about this, and it was going to happen for a graduation or a wedding or something like that. And lo and behold, they run in after they realize that they're going to do this together, and they're talking with me. They run into this person like in the grocery store, And I just thought it was so beautiful, because I think all of that is connected in families. And when you begin to think about that, and when the energy can go there, then I think things get clearer for you. Like Dr. Gilbert's message of when you have a clear thinking, you have to, think about what you're doing and where you go. Then I think things line up and you can, maybe they wouldn't have even seen this person in the grocery store. They wouldn't have even been open to that. But I think when there's open communication and there's clear thinking,
Right.
you're just better prepared. And you might even run into someone on the street,
Yeah, I always wonder when.
And that happens all the time. I talk to people all the time. I saw my ex on the street with a new person. Oh, what did you think?
Yeah, my example I was going to bring was a family friend who has been useful to me in my work as a therapist, as someone to think about as a leader in a family, a kind of a matriarch who I went to a party, and I watched this woman who would have been the generation above go up to her ex son-in-law and be able to say to him, I'm not pleased with what you did, but I like you. And I think we can figure this out. And I think just watch someone who can be a leader in a family take that tone of being able to connect. And I think it reverberates through the system when a leader can take a position. So that was my thought. I always think of her and her ability. And this would demonstrate in her personality in lots of ways of being able to talk about things that would be challenging for others to bring up. She was just able to do that in a way to kind of get to the hard things.
And the impact that might have on an offspring who doesn't know how to approach his or her parents because there was an affair.
Yeah.
And then there was a divorce. But just knowing that someone else is approaching it, or knowing that someone, that grandma is talking to this person, makes a difference. I mean, I think that's, like you said, that someone taking up leadership in the family to just do that and make it real, put it on the table, make it real. I don't like what you did.
Yeah. She would name things. I mean, she was the grandma, and I listened to her name things to my friend. I'm not happy with this decision, but tell me about it. Tell me what your thinking is. And I just think it created so much more flexibility and openness in that system.
Well, I was thinking about the wedding example again, and the kid, maybe the couple getting married, and how much energy they may put into how are we going to handle this, because my split parents are going to be there. And if the parents were managing it, or like you say, Katie, if anyone in the family is sort of leading, how that helps maybe contain the anxiety or point a way through. In fact, another George Clooney movie, Ticket to Paradise.
Yes.
He's divorced from Julia Roberts, and the daughter's getting married, and anyways, George Clooney.
I don't think they managed it well.
No, they don't.
But they get through.
Yeah. But how is that different, when there's been these continuing anxiety patterns versus they've figured out a way to have contact, or each person has had contact, and
I think it's
spread.
I think people can get focused on the divorce, the actual event, but I think it's more about, okay, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to handle it? How are you going to come out of this? What are you going to learn? Because that will just be repeated. The pattern will just be repeated in a different way if you don't really sit and process what was going on. I think you can manage the anxiety. You can put it into work or your children or yourself, your physical appearance or whatever. But the real processing is really thinking about, what you brought to the table and the history of your family and where all those triangles were happening in the marriage and what that was about. So that's the real processing. And maybe it does happen again. Who knows? I mean, some people get divorced another time. It's still not a bad thing.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
Well, and I was thinking, I think Carrie said it, but I think that I think an event in a family system like a divorce is when a coach can be a real resource to sit with the person, the couple, the kid, the parent, it's various people in the system to just think about what's coming up for you. How do you want to think about this? How do you want to show up? Where do you get caught? I think a coach can be a real resource to get thoughtful. Take the time to be thoughtful. One of the things I think of when I sit with people in divorces, there is this pressure to have quick responses, have quick action. And the benefit sometimes to taking time to really think through, how do I want to do this? What's my next step? What are my options? How do I want to show up? So I think it is my plug for for I think the resource that a coach can be who's thinking about this systemically.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Someone who can really think from a systems approach, look at what each person brought to the table. I think Dixie chose a really great quote from Bowen where he talked about it's two people, not just one.
Right.
In the dance.
Yeah. And I think what's helped me in my work in life to be neutral in the middle of these things is knowing the mechanisms, the patterns that a family uses. And then if, some things like this come up, they intensify. And in my brain, it's like, oh yeah, it makes sense that they would go to not speaking at all when they already had sort of a distant kind of relationship. And I don't know if you guys have thoughts on intensity or do new patterns maybe show up or...
I definitely think it's about intensity. Yes. I think that in a marriage, it is the fusing of the immature selves. And so I think the level of intensity of the coming together will also mirror the level of intensity of pulling apart. And so the fusion is also there in the apart, believe it or not. And I think that's what people don't understand, that if you maintain that still level of emotional investment and intensity during the breakup, then you're still in it, sort of.
Right.
And I think people don't understand that. So when people begin to back up out of it and get more neutral and say, "Oh, I see what you mean. Like if I take this to court when we go to court and get really upset about it, then I'm back in the fusion, even though we're not married." So I think that there is a closeness, an intensity, and a fusion in the fighting and in the divorce proceedings, if that's going on. And I think once people can figure that out, then they can find the freedom in finding their own and not getting into those intense, disagreements. It's like a tug of war, and people are digging their heels in. And go ahead, Kate.
I was thinking the part I would add to that is I think it is a useful time to really be mindful of the triangles, because I think the triangles that can develop or intensify during the dissolution of a marriage. I mean, your George Clooney example is great. I think a triangle with a lawyer and how you thoughtfully pick the person that's going to help assist you through this process can create a very different process depending on that person. I think about even, the family member you reach out to help you be thoughtful through this process versus a family member that is going to stir you up and and help, encourage the conflict. So I think, that would be a way I'd think about those triangles have a real big influence on that intensity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when a lot of times couples do come to therapy because they're at that point of the divorce. And if someone says it, I just say, okay, well, let's talk about it. What would it look like? You're saying this word. What does it look like? What would that mean for you? And really just listen to them, open that conversation up. What does that look like? What is the impact? What does that mean for you and your family? I've worked with couples that come in and are talking about that, and then somehow can manage to do some work in their family. From what I can see, because of the way I approach the work, is the work in their own family system. And then they can see the intensity of the marriage. I think when couples get together, and especially ones that will cut off from their own families, then there is just this really intense triangle, and it's really tight. And you can see that more when couples are cut off, that all the energy is just there. And that's really intense. And I mean, there are other versions of it, but I think when couples can look at, how are we so isolated right now? How did this happen? And how is it that we're so intense and so sensitive?
Yeah.
Well, takeaways, ideas, resources that people can keep thinking about?
I'll let you go, Katie.
I think I've said a few. I can post some of the chapters that I thought were useful for me to think about these things. But I, I said a pitch to a coach or a person. How when you're up against this challenge in life, do you get interested in who is going to help you think through it? Who is going to be a resource to you in this? And I think that would be one of my takeaways. And just thinking about how do I want to position myself as these relationships shift.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I found the Family Matters episode with you and Kathleen Cotter-Colley on divorce and adult children, which I thought was so useful because, it's a pretty standard line of we're going to stay married until the kids move out, right? And thinking through what does divorce mean for adult kids? So I'll put that link up because I thought it was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a while ago, but I still think it's relevant, and I think college orientations are now saying to the parents, this is not the time to get divorced. As I think they're so used to seeing it, and I think everybody knows that is a really difficult time for the parents, but I think there is something that comes up, when the kids lift off. What does that mean for the marriage?
Yeah.
Which we're going to be getting to those episodes. I think I'm thinking this through in the right order. We've got a launching episode, an empty nest episode, and then Kathleen Cotter-Colley on step families. So I hope we cover
thinking about all the potential directions that these.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Carrie, for joining us again.
It's good. Thank you.
I hope that this episode has been useful for people and that you take some ideas to think about as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.